We'll find a great. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Education Standards meeting. We will start today with an update from some of our priority topics. I will start with the literacy update, starting with the Aussie Early Literacy Task Force that I got to attend representing the DC SBOE. We went around, gave intros to the folks who were attending, and I think that was great to get a better sense of who was in the room. I'm excited that we did have a literacy instructor and a school librarian on the committee. And thank you for equipping me with a resolution that highlights the direction of the recommendations that we as a board agree on. And I will continue to move those forward as we get into more substance in meeting number 2. I'm also trying to get a meeting with the group that was hired by Aussie to convene the task force, but between now and the next meeting as well, just to better understand what this process might look like, knowing that our timing is tight if we want to make a unified ask by this next budget cycle. I also want to give a quick overview and then pass back to Mr. Zhu for an update on the literacy hearing that Chairman Mendelsohn hosted yesterday, where I zoomed out and made a stronger case for making a unified ask and a long-term, bolder ask for literacy investments rather than what I think we've done for over many years, which are shorter term, more ad hoc investments. And I gave the example of many reading instructors that I've spoken to over the last couple of years who told me that they have not had opportunities to gain structured literacy training, had a hard time finding opportunities to gain structured literacy training for those that did self-pay, and many were actually given a scholarship by the WTU. For those who did complete it, had a hard time implementing it once they got back to their schools, either because there was no curriculum for them to use, the assessments weren't aligned, or their heads of school or principals did not authorize them to actually use that new training. And I gave that example as a means to show. And then that, another piece of this is those who are looking for the training, there are not a lot of programs in the area that offer structural literacy training in higher ed, right? So there's a lot of work that we need to do to actually make this all possible, and there is no quick fix or silver bullet to all of this. I also want to highlight a couple stats that I heard and learned from the testimony, from Corinne's testimony yesterday, that we now have 100 participants in letters training this year, as well as an additional coach this year for the DC Reading Clinic. There's an AU partnership working with 2 clusters to train school leadership and some teachers. And new programs that I learned about were called Literacy Architects and Early Literacy Leadership Institute, which is a 4-webinar session online. And in addition to that, right, Aussie does TNTP funding, and it's my understanding that some schools also fund Orton Gillingham. And so for me, there's 2 pieces to this that I want to push on, and I do think that align with the resolution that you all have authorized me to push forward as our representative on the task force, which are, let's think through strategically why we would fund many different programs rather than focusing on one, or at least have I would just want to hear a clear explanation for why we are doing this in a what seems from the outside a relatively piecemeal way, rather than as a strategic, broad swooping. And again, I think of it as a bold investment, the way that Mississippi did to fund letters training for all teachers, right? And the clarity and simplicity of that is stark in contrast to what I think we're doing as pilots in DC right now. Let me pause there, pass to Mr. Zhu and Kathleen to see if I've missed anything from the hearing yesterday that you think is important to update the committee on.
I think a lot of what the different public witnesses had to say did relate a lot to this idea of lack of coherence among programs. And there were teachers and school leaders from across the district who talked about the challenge in finding staff to do interventions who were trained, or finding time within the day to do those interventions that didn't take away from core instruction in non-tested subjects like social science or social studies, science, arts. The challenge of finding classroom materials. And there was also a discussion around funding and how a lot of these programs are being funded with ESSER money right now, which will not be around forever. So thinking about how those programs might be able to continue after that money is not there anymore. And there was also a discussion about attendance and kind of continuing building literacy after that sort of K2 that has been the focus so far, up through like middle school and high school. So wanting students to be proficient in literacy or on grade level, yes, in second grade, yes, in fourth grade, but also through till graduation. And sort of addressing some of the middle school slide that had been noted in some of the data even before the pandemic began. Yes.
Great. Thank you.
I see.
And
Representative Wattenberg.
Super. Well, first, let me just say we're so excited to have you on the team, and thank you, and thanks for diving right in, Representative Wattenberg.
Yeah, it all sounds great, and likewise, so many welcomes to Kathleen. We need you so much. One quick thing that sort of follows on what Kathleen was saying, and to some degree, what Alistair was saying, you know, our resolution, and I take responsibility for this, does not include anything explicit on interventions. And I almost added that amendment and it just got too confusing. So I didn't, and I really just don't want us to forget it as we go forward. And to Kathleen's point, it is a huge problem for teachers. Like, you can screen and you know these students need support, and there's nothing in the staffing or the scheduling of the school or the students that allows for it. It's a huge, it's just a huge issue. And I just want to just raise it to make sure that we're all sort of aware that it's not in the resolution, but we shouldn't forget it. And if we need to, we can amend the resolution if that's important. But
thank you. Any other points on literacy before we move on to social studies?
Lauren, was there anything you wanted to add from the government witnesses?
No, I don't think so. Alistair pretty much covered all of the interventions that are being provided. One other thing that they added was just that the professional development days from the district have all been aligned to the science of reading. And then they also have asynchronous webinars available for teachers. And then OSSI launched a dyslexia coursework through YouTube. But it seems like there was a disconnect in communicating that with teachers, because some of the public testimony mentioned that they didn't know where to go for that. So, but that's being worked on, it sounds like.
So just to wrap this up, I think this is an ask to the staff. If it's possible to compile that list of interventions that we did hear from this hearing, at least. It's been hard as I ask folks to track down, who is doing what literacy training for whom. And actually, I think at the hearing yesterday was the best place to find as comprehensive a list as I have been able to. So to pull from that to at least compile our own would be helpful as we move forward.
Okay. Lauren and I have been putting together a summary that we were going to send out, so we can add that as part of it.
Super, thank you. And for any of them that we know how many teachers were given the opportunity, and then further there, which I think is going to be really tough, is how are people told about the opportunity, and did we actually get the word out about it, right? Because I think as I go around talking with reading instructors, they don't know. Very few still know about even the DC Reading Clinic, let alone the rest. So that piece as well, because what I fear is that for any of these, if the was made, well, no one signed up for them. We had 40 spots, only 20 teachers did. That to me is not does not outweigh the resounding ask from reading instructors across the city who have shared with me that they would like more opportunities, but do not know that they exist.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, well, let me move on to social studies standards. Should I pass the baton to Alex or to Jessica to start?
Please pass it to Jessica unless she's having connectivity issues.
Okay, great. President Sutter?
President Sutter, I'm not sure we can hear you, so maybe I will jump in.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, you should definitely jump in because my train is arriving and I don't want to be off mute while that happens.
Okay.
But if you go ahead and share what I shared in my email, and then I'll be back and seated in a few minutes.
Okay, not a problem at all. So just for awareness, but for members of the public who are joining, and also for folks who weren't able to join in the working session yesterday, we have been informed by Dr. Grant, the state superintendent, and OSSI that we will be receiving a copy of the draft social studies standards by Friday, December 16th. We've also been told we will not be getting an advanced copy, but that's when the public comment period will be starting. And so I think we wanted to use this time and opportunity to talk through kind of what is next as we prepare for receiving those standards, as well as how we are going to execute on getting public comment and public engagement on them. And so I'm going to pull up an email that President Sutter shared with me, such that we knew she would be getting on a train exactly at this time. And so bear with me for 1 second.
Alex, I also copied that into the notes, if you're in the notes.
Oh, that's even easier, Kathleen. Okay, so President Sutter wanted to first talk about some ideas around the social studies engagement process. One, she mentioned that she would like to have the current board members provide comments on the draft standards to submit to OSSI as like board comment. And I think President Sutter raised that at yesterday's working session. But she does note that staff are going to be away from the office starting on December 22nd. And so it could be tough, but kind of trying to figure out how we can provide some sort of board level comment before the current board members are exiting. I know that the public comment period, I think it will likely be 45 days, I think is what we're hearing. I think Dr. Grant has shared that in some previous remarks. If it's their traditional 30 days, it would likely close, I think, at the end of January 17th. If it's 45 days, that actually takes us to the end of January. And so we're trying to kind of figure out, I think, what might make the most sense with submission of comment. How do we, Jessica notes, how do we possibly bridge the gap between old and new members and making sure that public comment might be submitted to if we can't get something in before staff leave. So that's the first thing that she noted.
Alex, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm back on for a moment before we start moving, and I think I'll lose connection again. To me, the way I was thinking about that public comment piece is if current members can get their comments in before the 21st, so between the 16th and the 21st, take a look at the standards and send comments in. And then once the new board is sworn in, if they could add their comments to that, the letter that would go to OSSI as part of the public comment period would be a combination of old and new members. And I think that would be powerful if we could make that happen.
Thank you for that clarification.
Can I ask for clarification on that? For the board
Sure.
comments, is the intention to kind of have it be sort of synthesize what all the board members are saying, or having them all sort of presented separately? Because I guess either way,
It sort of depends on how,
the board.
sorry,
could
it sort of depends on how
submit-
the comments fall out. Like typically, the board has submitted a letter of public comment to OSSI on a number of policies OSSI has opened for public comment. And we submit a letter sort of in the spirit of the board. I do think that's tricky on this particular timing. So I think the question is, it kind of depends on what people's comments look like. Like if our comments are all over the place, we might have to say like, members of the board shared comments which included da 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 da. I'm not sure if it would be possible to synthesize them, and I don't think we'll know until we see the comments. But I'd be open to, I'm curious to hear what my colleagues think about that.
I'll jump in to two things. One is, I totally agree. It's sort of hard to know how we would want to respond, not having seen them at all. I will say, in my experience on the board, the opportunity for the board to actually look at the proposed standards is, in this case, is really, really minimal. I mean, I was on the board, I think the last time we did standards might have been the health standards, and there was just much more time and opportunity to engage in comments. So I'm not sure. Well, I just want to say that. And beyond that, I am worried about this, what seems to be this very short time period. And I think in the past, when it's been 30 days, that has been after more public knowledge about it. In any case, this 30 days or 45 days is over the holidays, and it feels so unwelcoming. And I'm just worried, given all of the attention that's been paid to social studies, that it's just going to raise people's hackles. So I don't know if there's some way that we can encourage them to have a longer review period or something. Anyway, want to raise that.
And Representative Wattenberg, I hope I'm not misspeaking. And so I know President Sutter dropped off, but I think it's my understanding that OSSI may have recognized that it is over the holidays, and that's why they were suggesting 45 days instead of their traditional 30 days. Obviously, I've not been part of previous standards review processes, and this does raise, the question around like why we've hired Kathleen to bring her on to like think about how are these processes actually done in a consistent manner. But I mean, I hear what you're saying. I know that there was some initial concern from the OSSI around the politics of what the US Congress could look like. We know that it has shifted a little bit, but probably not to the extent some had expected. And so I think there was also some concern with how much time and space is given for folks who are outside of the District of Columbia to try to govern or have influence over what we're trying to do.
Well, I am very sympathetic to that concern. But you know, at this point, it's going to overlap with the new Congress in any case. So, you know, not knowing what's in it, I don't know what to recommend or say, but just it's an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really tough. I think in an ideal scenario and situation, like these would have been delivered, fully public commented, et cetera, before the end of this year. And yeah, it's, as you said, Representative Wattenberg, it's tough to fully ascertain what will happen until we actually see what the standards are saying.
Yeah.
All right, so where do we go from here, and what's the next step, Alex?
So I think what President Sutter is suggesting makes sense to me in the interim, right? Like, let's try to get 2 batches of comments. If we can get it into a combined letter that's delivered before the end of a public comment period, I think that's great. I would defer to board leadership and others about like how and if we want to push OSCE for a longer public comment period, given the holidays. I know Representative Chang has heard from a constituent about that, and so I do think that's something valid that could be raised at the next OSCE SBOE meeting. And I think, as President Sutter shared yesterday, that meeting is actually happening after we should have received the standards. And so we might be able to speak a little bit better to like why we might need more time, or what, or we may have more clarity on what the public comment period is going to look like from OSCE at that time as well.
And thanks for raising what Sally wrote. Do you see any room for us to push for more time for the review process, given that it is coming at a time when most people are not planning to be at their desks?
I will say from like a staff perspective, I'll be fully transparent. I will be gone starting December 16th through the new year. And so I won't be able to facilitate some of the things when the standards are actually being released. But, Kathleen will be on staff, Lauren will be on staff, others will be on staff at least through the 22nd before the staff vacations. I do recognize that this is a really important and pivotal piece of work for this board. I think across the staff, we recognize that this is probably at this time, like the piece of work that requires the significant amount of work because it is time sensitive. And so I imagine that if the board is hoping to get some sort of letter compiled or out with current departing board members, contents included, I think we'll probably try to make that happen.
I'm just reading President Sutter's note. It would be great if we could communicate over to OSCE, at least the ask that Sally made. So is that something that board leadership could help us with?
Mm-hmm.
I'll follow up with President Sutter offline.
Yeah, I think she said she'll add it to the agenda for that meeting on the 19th with Dr. Grant.
Great, thank you.
Representative Wattenberg.
Yeah, the one thing I want to say, I am actually less concerned with us having with us having the opportunity to write a letter and use that staff, especially given the staff time issue in December. I am very concerned with the ability of the public to comment and the ability to encourage the public to comment. Sally, which is the letter that some of us are referring to, talks about reaching out to her professional community, but there's a lot of professional communities, there's a lot of parent communities that should be getting copies of this in order to look at it. And all the different people who would be passing it on may not be at their desks on, that Monday when they arrive. And so they won't even be looking at it until January. And they're gonna, so it's just the number of ways in which it's not going to get out to the public. Normally if I wasn't leaving the board, I'll do this anyway, I'd be sending these out to my list and put, as I'm sure a lot of other people will be doing. And by the time people get them and have a chance to look at them, it's just going to be very crunch. So I'm concerned. That's what I'm concerned about. That's my main immediate
Great.
concern.
Yep. And I share that. So we'll
Can
ask. Yep. Go ahead.
Sorry, I have connectivity again. Can you tell me how long you think would be appropriate? Are we asking for a 75-day comment period, a 90-day comment period? I think if we go in with a specific ask, we will likely have an easier time getting an answer.
Well, just to fill up the space, I would say either of those is way better. 90 days sounds good. And I also understand that people are worried about having it out there that long. I get that part too. And without seeing the standards, it's so hard to know. I think
that's really helpful,
Yeah.
Representative Wattenberg. I think the other thing I would say about the 90 days is to think a 45-day comment period would have it close roughly around January 30th. If you doubled that, we're looking at March 30th. Now the opportunity to come to the board for a vote after the comments are absorbed is not probably until June. And that pushes back again the timeline for the rollout of the standards. So that's why I'm asking, I see the concerns that people may not get them till January 2nd or 3rd when they're back at their desks. And maybe the 3rd to the 30th doesn't feel long enough. Are we asking to extend to February 15th? Or are we looking for something more like this really should extend into March, and we're acknowledging that it pushes back every other timeline about voting and implementation as well? I'm not making a judgment call on those. I'm genuinely asking how we should approach it.
So part of it is it's not in my head, the rollout. In other words, what you're describing is actually a longer process, right? In other words, there will be all these other opportunities for people to comment and for the board to, in theory, say, actually, we'd like to see XYZ, not ABC. So to some extent, that's actually what I'm looking for. That's what I'm concerned that we don't have. So if it's all in there, is that what you're saying? I guess I'm not clear on the process after they come out.
I have shared everything I know about the process at this point. We have not been given other information.
Yeah,
so
what
I do know is that there is a public comment period that OSSI has for any proposed regulations, and they're observing this public comment period. But rather than doing their typical 30 days, which would end around January 17th, they're talking 45 days, which would be more like January 30th. And my question is, if we think there needs to be a longer period, when do we want them to make the ask for an extension? Knowing that after they get comments, they have to incorporate them, and then they have to bring it back to the board for a vote. Right now, I think they're thinking they're coming to the board for a vote in March or thereabouts, March or April. If we ask them to extend it, it could be that they don't get to come to the board for a vote until June or July. And then that pushes back implementation for schools and the rollout of professional development further.
Well, I will say the June or July sounds way late to me. So I think April would be okay. I can't speak to May, but I guess if we can get it at least until that April, that gives more time on the front end for people to comment, and I guess more time for people to comment even during that comment period, and then for board members as well to weigh in. as they hear from people. So so I would say, if that's the 75-day one, that's what I would go for. And that would still leave it for likely an April board vote. Is that what you're saying? Oh, I think maybe we lost Jessica again. All right.
No, I have you, but I guess what I'm unclear on here, Ruth, is I'm saying the comment period is a question I need guidance from my colleagues on. When do you want me to ask them to extend the comment period?
So that's what I said. I think I said.
Go ahead.
So you would said 75 or 90. I initially said 90, but now that I understand this extended piece, I would say 75 or would be. Because
so that
as
would
I'm
take us to
understanding,
March 1st.
and that sounds like then there could be a vote in April.
No, I think what I'm saying is OSSI expects that after the comment period closes, they may need up to 2 months in order to be able to incorporate any changes and then do what they usually do with the board, which is do 2 working sessions before the board votes. Maybe even if it's 1 working session, if the comments close in March, they need a month to incorporate them. So then they come to April working session. That would be the earliest they could vote is April, but I don't believe that would happen. I think it would be a May vote. And now you're running into a problem of that doesn't leave OSSI a lot of time to prepare the standards to actually be given to LEAs to do things like plan their summer professional development to start to socialize them. Whereas if the vote were happening in March, it does give them enough time to prep and prepare to give the standards for socialization at summer professional developments. That's the thing I think we have to be mindful of.
So you're saying that you think it's important that our final vote be in March, that if it's later than a final vote in March, that's going to complicate things for the rollout?
I think it will complicate things for schools to begin to use these standards in their professional development. My understanding is that last year we had hoped to vote on them. It was a full year ago in the winter that we wanted to vote on them. Then we thought we'd vote on them in the spring. And all of that really threw off LEA's plans for professional development last summer. And now we run the risk of throwing off another year's worth of summer professional development. And I would be hesitant to do that because then I think you lose the excitement over new standards and they become another thing that doesn't work in a way that helps schools at it.
Well, I appreciate everything you're saying. It's an unfortunate situation that we're in, and without, again, and I appreciate what you're saying. I also think if we overly cut off the comment period, that could also be very bad. And without seeing them, it's really hard to know. So I don't know, I don't know what to say. I mean,
would it be helpful if we do something to kind of like map out a timeline so people are more clear about how long different parts of this process are going to take to kind of figure out what would be an acceptable amount of time?
I think that would be helpful, actually.
When is your meeting, President Sutter, with OSSI?
The meeting is on Monday, December 19th.
Okay.
That will be the Monday following when we are likely to get the standards. And that is the Monday preceding our public meeting.
So if there is staff capacity, my proposal would be that we forward that timeline to this committee as an email thread. And if folks could chime in and have a conversation there that can inform how President Sutter approaches the December 19th meeting, that would be super.
That sounds great.
Thank you. And so then we have a conversation about the Ed Standards panel. Kathleen, is that something that you could speak to?
Yes, so as of right now, we have, like I said yesterday, one person confirmed to be on the panel, and a number of other suggestions of people who we either have or will shortly be reaching out to. So our one confirmed person is sort of able to speak to like action civics and getting students involved in politics. Her name is Vancia, and she works for McVitch Challenge. And we are still sort of looking for the teacher, like a teacher perspective, the global perspective, Washington, DC history, and then Representative Wattenberg requested someone to be able to speak to sort of democratic ideals, and has given some suggestions for that. So we are sort of in like reaching out and waiting at this point, in terms of the people who will actually be on the panel. And I will still welcome suggestions on people to be on it if there are suggestions on that. And I think sort of another thing to consider with the panel is potential questions. And I know Representative Sutter has forwarded a couple to consider, but they're, if we would like to sort of think about that now, that's an option as well.
Kathleen, thank you so much for that. One suggestion I had for some of the other people we're trying to fill slots for is that it would be great to just use our Social Studies Standards Advisory Committee list and do a general email to them and say, these are the people we're looking for, and ask either if any of them want to self-nominate for those slots. Like we have some teachers of DC history, we have a couple of scholars who do civic education. That may be a good group to start with as we're sourcing more panelists.
Okay. And I think just the thing that is a challenge right now for getting panelists is one, the December 21st date is just really busy for a lot of people and close to the holidays, and many people are traveling, and also the requirement to be in person since we're not able to have a hybrid panel at this time, or to have the panelists be hearing what's going on. So I will continue that. Yes, that's a good idea, and I will do that.
Yeah, I think I was reflecting on that, that set of challenges you raised last night, that at least all of those folks are DC based. So while some of them may be traveling for the holidays, at least the in-person pieces maybe a greater odds or greater likelihood of success because they're all DC local.
Yes, thank you. Were there any other comments that people had on the panelists?
Thank you, Kathleen.
And then did anyone want, do we want to talk about potential questions now, or people could also send me those just afterwards if they have thoughts?
Yeah, why don't we start that over text, and let's just, so we're not the bottleneck, Kathleen, if we do it, we tackle it from both sides. If you could come up with some that you think we should get to, and we could send you additional ones on top of that as well, that would be great.
I have a question. It's partly about the questions, but I realize it's also about the panel. I assumed that we were going to ask people to kind of review the standards and comment on the standards, and then the questions would be about the standards. Is that right? Because we don't have the standards yet.
Yes, and so I guess this is also something that is a little bit of a challenge, is people, assuming the standards are released on the 16th, will have 6 days to review them before the panel. So we've been sort of directing people that, you know, they don't need to maybe think about it from every perspective, but just sort of like the angle that they are to be able to speak from. And then hopefully OSSI will also be including like a cover letter or a summary of some of the changes that they've made to kind of direct people where to look. But I again don't know if that's actually going to happen.
One
Yeah.
other, oh, sorry, one other idea I just had about the panel is one of the other things that we explicitly name in our opening resolution is the importance of history in the early grades.
Mhm.
And I know that was an issue in an earlier draft, and maybe we could get someone who's in a position to talk about that. I don't have a name offhand, but I could think of one, and maybe somebody else could too, but I think that would be another topic that is worth really hearing people on.
Mhm. I think that's also one that could overlap with like the teacher perspective. We don't have a teacher confirmed yet. So it could be someone from a younger grade band.
Although we talked about Cosby, who was,
Mhm.
oh, but he would be the DC history person, or he could be, so
Yeah.
that could work. Yeah, it's a good idea, actually.
All right. So then moving on to new business. Kathleen, we spoke about this as well.
Mhm.
The bringing in folks to talk with us about either DC Reading Clinic, letters, TNTP, one of the existing programs that DCPS or OSSI is already funding for structural literacy training. Would you elaborate on that theme?
I do not recall beyond that what we said about it.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So I am likely to have gotten it mixed up with someone else I spoke to on the staff. But the thought there and why we put it on the agenda is that it would be helpful for us to learn more about the variety of programs and that we're already offering in DC. And also, it's my understanding, Alex, that you met some of these providers at NASB as well. Is that correct? And so being able to take their expertise and learn more about what is happening, how to make sure that we move this forward properly, pulling from their experience in other jurisdictions as well. But that is something that I think my ask to this committee is, would there be interest in meeting? And I would be most excited about, I will say, meeting Miss Bear from the DC Reading Clinic, who replaced Mary Clayman in the role, to learn more about what's going on there, since that is our in-house homegrown version of this training.
Representative Chang, just a clarifying question. Do you think it would be in the committee's best interest to try to convene all these folks to kind of come at one time to speak in kind of like a like a panel presentation discussion to the committee?
Oh, I don't think I fully consider the dynamics of that. So,
Or like one,
give
or
me a
like
second.
one-off visitors. I think there's
Yeah.
value, but
I think there's value in one-off visitors instead. So we've been pretty efficient, I'd say, at keeping our side of the conversation to 30 minutes. So if they had 30 minutes to talk to us and then the rest of the meeting was 30 minutes, how do folks feel about that? And I know we don't have January or February committee meetings, right? Following what Director Butler said yesterday. So and I think that the timing would still line up to help inform us on where to move the task force and our recommendations.
That sounds okay to me. I know you're the only representative here who will still be on the committee. in January. So
Why don't we save that then? Actually, why don't we save that whole bucket for when we have new members on this committee?
Okay.
But you could introduce them all to it in January, because nothing else on the panels.
That's not a bad idea.
I mean, Representative Wattenberg, I mean, there's some potential validity to that. I mean, not to get too far ahead, but like January public meeting, like, there are particular issues that we could carry in from this existing board into a new board space, and there could be a ripe opportunity for literacy at that time. But we could talk about that offline, Representative.
Great. Yep, that sounds good. Any other new business?
I don't think so. I think Kathleen wanted to talk a little bit about just the general ed standards revision process. And I don't know if she had any thinking on like the standards piece as a whole when we think about how standards are happening in the district. And then before I turn to Kathleen, I do want to share this, and I think President Sutter has shared this in the past. But it is my understanding that OSSI is going to be coming to the state board early next year with an addendum to our health education standards related to legislation that was passed around period products, and to make sure that the health standards align with that legislation. So just like a flag that is something that is likely forthcoming in early 2023.
Okay.
I don't have any comments about the process at this time. I think I've sent out an email to each of the members of the committee, hoping to kind of hear their perspective on it so far. And I've actually talked to all the current or all the present representatives about that, either having had that conversation or talked about having it. So I think that's just something that we're going to be thinking about going forward and trying to make the process be sort of more regular and efficient, so that we can have the standards be reviewed. Not every, it's been
2 decades.
Yeah. And so I think Darren and I have been talking about ways to do with sort of a post analysis once this whole social studies standards process has been completed, to kind of reflect on how well the process worked, how well it sort of promoted equity, how well it promoted student voice, and sort of different ways that it could be, parts of the process could be sort of brought forward and continued, or ways to address some of the challenges that may have happened. I see your hand, Representative Wattenberg.
Yeah, so we're going to talk further. So I'm just sort of raising this for the record, which is one thing I really hope does get carried into kind of the protocols. And I guess there had been this conversation about writing up these protocols, and that's clearly going to go into the next year, I would guess. But the one thing that I think is important to go in there, and I think it would be unique, and I think it would be great, is that part of what people need to consider when they're considering the content standards in different subjects is the extent to which it adequately builds student content knowledge that's going to feed their advanced comprehension. So for example, that's a way of sort of saying to the social studies standards, hey, you guys, all that history left, all that stuff that was going to help people understand reading left, that's not okay, that should be part of what people are looking for.
Mm-hmm. Noted. And that was something actually someone discussed at the literacy hearing as well, the need to kind of continue to be thinking about building background knowledge and like having students engage sort of deeply in sort of knowledge building and like inquiry around subjects. So that's definitely something we want to think about. But that's all I have on that for now, unless anyone else has anything.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kathleen. Thanks for again, diving in and getting moving things forward already. And so we will then, Alex, when is our next meeting as a committee? It would not be until after the new members join and after a pause in committee meetings. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding according to Executive Director Butler. So it's
Okay.
like that the next committee meeting would probably follow new committee appointments, which will happen at the February public meeting. I don't know that date off the top of my head, but I imagine we probably could meet as soon as the last week in February if we wanted to.
I know
Okay.
Director Butler did say something about the social studies standards, so we may sort of not have like a full meeting, but have some discussion around those. But I don't.
That makes sense as an ad hoc stopgap,
just 'cause
right?
it
So
is like the time sensitive,
yeah,
potentially more or less so, depending on how things go.
sure thing. Okay. Well, since this is the last time that this particular makeup will meet, thank you all so much. And it's been a great year working with you. Looking forward to continuing the work with you, Lauren, Kathleen, Alex, and Representative Wattenberg. You know I will be continuing to ask you questions. I hope that is okay after you have left this committee formally. And hope everyone has a nice end of year.
And let me just say, it's been lovely working with all of you, and I will, I'm sure, be seeing you at least at some point, and so.
Public
Right,
comment,
great.
Ruth. See you at
Public comment, right. As Alex and I noted last night, I know where he lives, so.
That is true. I know where you live too, Ruth.
Well, that's true too. So,
All right. Well, I hope you all have a good night and talk to you later.
okay, bye-bye, guys.
Bye.